birth control is thinking about this from an intersexual competition perspective, birth control is a fascinating case study, because so we just take the pill for the moment, and people sort of expected that when we introduced the pill, that you would end up with far fewer unwanted pregnancies, far fewer abortions, and women would have all this reproductive control. And we actually saw the opposite. So what happened when, and there's someone who probably knows some of their details a bit more is going to come on and say, well, that's not quite right. But I think this is essentially a fair summary of what happened overall, is that when we introduced the pill, what happened is that women started having a whole lot more sex. And when women start having a whole lot more sex, the market price of sex comes down. When the market price of sex comes down, because it's a more readily available commodity now, that means that other women, perhaps those not on the pill or those who were not waiting for the pill in order to be able to be more sexually liberated, right? That what you see is a shift in the population norm. And so the way I kind of think about how people liberal or conservative in a sexual sense, and maybe in many other senses as well, is that it's with respect to the population norm. So if we assume that I am, or give something about way about myself now, think a bit more carefully before I continue this sentence, but too late, I've started now. Oh well. So if we assume, for example, that I am a slightly more conservative, a slightly on the conservative side in terms of my sociosexual orientation, to put me in a highly conservative social environment, so take me to, I don't know, the Midwest in America or something, where it's really conservative, then I would still be on the conservative side of whatever the norm was, whatever the average was in that society. If you take me to a highly liberal society, I would predict my behavior to change such that I was now still on a little bit on the conservative side of whatever the norm was. That's how I sort of see a lot of individual differences interacting with social norms, is that the individual differences are largely with respect to the social norm. So when we introduced the pill, a lot more women started having a lot more sex. This lowers the market price of sex, and it basically shifts everybody's behavior then, whether you're on the pill or not, whether it was a fear of getting pregnant that was stopping you from having more sex or not. What happens is you see a shift in the whole population. And so even though, yes, we now had this pill, this form of birth control, which was, really effective when you remember to take it every single day. This is still very much, there's still a big human factor there in the efficacy of the pill, right? You've got to actually remember to take it every day. It's not just, you do it once and then magically you're protected, right? This is a daily thing. So obviously violations are going to be really common. And so what we actually saw is a lot more sex, a lot more unwanted pregnancies, and a lot more abortions. The pill didn't have the same impact on female behavior as it did. However, what we're also seeing, and I guess this is sort of somehow played out a little bit over time, which is sort of how I see the way female intersexual competition interacts with socio-political norms, socio-sexual norms, is that it's a little bit of a shapeshifter. It will change what it recommends women do, what it advocates for, what it encourages other women to endorse, as a function of what would be, most damaging for other women's reproductive success in the population at the time, which is a little bit why feminism keeps going through these different waves and keeps splintering and keeps sort of having these really inconsistent mixed messages. Sort of, there's one umbrella of feminism and it's all ostensibly pro-women, although I would argue that it's not. But it all is ostensibly pro-women as sort of this unifying theme through it. But in fact, there's a huge number of contradictions and this point just doesn't make sense to this point, and it's completely internally incoherent. And the reason for that is because what actually makes the whole thing coherent is not some desire to promote gender equality or to promote the welfare or happiness or something or other of women. There's different feminist perspectives, is that every single one of them is attempting to emancipate women from motherhood. It's attempting to limit women's reproductive success. And so as social norms change, as attitudes change, feminism has to change in order to encourage women, in order to convince women that what's now needed, what's now we're going to call empowerment or freedom or whatever, is going to be this new thing, because in the current environment, that's what's going to limit your reproductive success the most.